Hi theory students. Today we're going to be talking about analyzing non-chorale textures. We'll be doing a lot of this semester, and I want to give you some tips as we go forward and do this. Largely there are four big issues that you have to deal with. The first one is identifying where the cadences and phrases are. This is very important because it tells us a lot about the structure of the pieces we'll be hearing. Next is locating the harmonic rhythm. If we know how often the chords are changing, we're already pretty far along in figuring out what the harmonies are. Third, separating the embellishments from the chord tones. If we know what notes should be part of the chord, then the ones that don't belong to the chord must be some kind of embellishment, and then we can start to analyze them to figure out what sorts of embellishments we're hearing. And finally, one technique that I'll show you is how to use harmonic reductions to simplify textures and to be able to follow voice leading. Let's take these one by one. Cadences and phrases. Every phrase ends with a cadence, but not all pauses or breathing places make a harmonic cadence. When we studied phrases, we talked about this, and we even gave a name for something. We called it a phrase member when we had a pause in the middle of a phrase, but harmonically it didn't support a cadence. Use what you know about the basic parts of the phrase, that is to say, our tonic, predominant, dominant, and tonic structure, as well as your ear, to help you decide when you've got an actual cadence or when it's just a brief pause in the middle of a phrase. For cadences other than authentic cadences in the home key, distinguish between modulation and tonicization. And we've already seen some examples in the Schubert where we make cadence on a 5 chord, and the question is whether it's a half cadence in our home key or an authentic cadence in the key of the dominant. This is not always so cut and dry. This is something that we have to have some experience in order to be able to do better. Next, locating the harmonic rhythm. In non-chorale textures, the chords usually change once or twice per measure. Use what you know about triads and chord progressions to take a good guess as to when the chords change. Usually, for example, in a 2-4 measure or in a 3-4 measure, there may only be one chord per measure. In a 4-4 measure, sometimes they separate on beats 1 and 2 versus beats 3 and 4. But just as a rhythm for a melody may include half notes, quarter notes, and eighth notes, so too the harmonic rhythm may be varied even if there's one value you hear more than others. Sometimes the level of detail determines when to assign a Roman numeral or not. For example, you may have 3 chords in a row that form a 1, a 5-4-3, and a 1-6. You can analyze each of these, or it may be possible just to put a bracket and call that all tonic, as it's just an expansion of 1. In this case, it's a close call as to whether the 5-4-3 is just a kind of embellishment or whether it's its own harmony. You can determine which level of detail you would like. Generally, I would like a fairly good level of detail, but sometimes you're digging too much. Separating embellishments from chord tones, and the examples that I'll show you will make this a little bit clearer. This is an exercise in pattern recognition. Determining which notes fit the chord and which are embellishments go hand in hand. We usually start by trying out or choosing the most appropriate chord using the entire harmonic rhythm area. For example, in the key of C major, a measure that alternates E and G would most likely be a 1 chord, not a 3 chord, because 1 is typically what we would expect. Likewise, a melodic pattern of E, F, G would likely use E and G as the chord tones, as those frame a third, and the F in between would most likely be a passing tone. As for embellishments, the strong beats are most often chord tones, but not always. And we'll learn, for example, that in the classical period, they were much freer in having accented embellishments like suspensions or appoggiaturas. Also, most embellishments are resolved by step, so if we have a leap from a note, not 100% of the time, but again, as a tendency, it most often means that it's a chord tone and not an embellishment. And finally, in the examples I'm about to show you, create a harmonic reduction. On a fresh sheet of staff paper, write the chord tones and whole notes, collapsing the entire rhythmic activity into one moment. If you wish to indicate embellishments, you can add them as black note heads in contrast to the whole notes that you're writing. And the Roman numeral analysis should be easier now that you see everything in block form, as though it were like chorale texture. You may see standard voice leading, or the free texture may send notes to different registers or leave some notes seemingly unresolved. This is one of the features of freer textures, and this is one of the things that we'll discuss when we analyze pieces. Now let's listen to the first part of this Bach Prelude in C minor. Follow along. Okay, we'll stop there and just look at how we might approach the first 9 measures. Here are some of the features of this pattern, and note this carefully. When we hear in the right hand, you may notice in a piece in C minor, those are chord tones. The D doesn't seem to fit in with the chord. So that D could be explained as a neighbor note to the 2 E flats. This C, on the other hand, does fit with the chord, and again, this D does not. The entire second half of the measure is a repeat of the first half of the measure, so it doesn't tell us anything new harmonically. In the left hand, the C and G are part of the chord. The F, the third of the 4 notes, is a neighbor to the G, and likewise the E flat fits, and the G fits, and the F does not. So here's one way we can start analyzing this, block by block. So now on our voice leading reduction, we'll make a grand staff. We'll put in the key signature, and now remember in the left hand, we use those chord tones, and in the right hand, these chord tones. And here they are, C, E flat, and C, C, G, and the E flat in between. Okay, for the next measure, we keep C in the bass, have A flat and F in the left hand, A flat, F, and C in the right hand. So if we're analyzing in C minor, a 1 chord, and a 4/6/4. Going back to the third measure now, let's follow that pattern. B natural, F, C in the bass, A flat, and F. And the D over here on beat 2. We notice that the C doesn't seem to belong with the other notes, and this chord would be B flat, D, F, and A flat. In other words, a 7/7 over a tonic pedal. Okay, and we can follow some of the voice leading, G to A flat, E flat to F, C here up to D, C down to A flat and up to B natural, and let's resolve this to finish this particular example. So now over here, we're back on the C minor chord. A little different display in the left hand than we had in measure 1, but harmonically it's the same. Note, by the way, if you wanted to follow the voice leading, leading tone B natural goes up to C. The other part of that tritone, F, goes to E flat. The 7th of the 7/7, A flat, goes down to G. So we can follow our voice leading, and it more or less holds here. This, of course, is a 1 chord. We're not even adding the embellishments, such as the D neighbor note here, the F neighbor note here. But we could add those in if we wanted a little more level of detail. Now let's listen to the first phrase of the slow movement of Beethoven's famous Pathétique Sonata. We'll stop there, where Beethoven reprises the melody where he opens the movement. In this case, it appears that the chords are changing every quarter note. So everything here seems to fit within a chord, and we see the arpeggiation. Everything here, there, there. This will be a bit of a challenge. We'll have to see what we want to do with that. And likewise this, and see if we want to fill in the eighth notes for chords, or just leave them. Likewise, as we go on in the phrase, it appears we have one harmony for all of this measure. We'll have to see about that measure, that one, and that one leading up to the cadence. So, if we try to make a reduction of this, it might look something as follows. So let's put in our key signature. 4 flats, A flat major, and remember that we have the A flat, E flat, A flat, and the C in the melody. Since that's only half of the measure, I'm not going to draw the bar line yet. But now notice that it's D flat in the bass, E flat, G, and B flat. Going back, E flat on top, C in the bass, E flat and A flat in the middle. And now G in the bass, E flat, B flat here. And now we have E flat going to D flat. We'll have to figure out which one of those might belong and which doesn't. So the question now is whether E flat belongs in this chord or D flat. So if we start analyzing, here is a 1, 5, 4, 2, 1, 6. Okay, this appears to be an E flat chord, which is a 5 chord in first inversion. And in this case, the D flat could be understood either as a passing tone or as part of a 7th, which would make that a 5, 6, 5. I think we could live with either one of those interpretations. Over here now, we get the A flat major chord on the 8th note, and then we have to decide what we're going to do about these, whether this is going to be a separate chord, the 5, 6, or whether we're just going to write those in as passing tones and go right from the A flat major chord to the F minor chord, but then we've got an interesting interpretation there as well. So if I want to include, maybe a good solution would be to include that entire chord, but do it in a darker note head to indicate that it's not as important a chord. And now, to review where we're going, C in A flat, and then going to D natural in A flat with a B flat there. So if we take that last chord from a 6th chord, now if we go B flat, D natural, F, and A flat, that's a dominant 7th type chord applied to 5. It would seem to me then, because of the importance of that secondary dominant, that we'd probably like to count each of these. This one because it shows how the one passed through to it, and this one because it connects it to the 5 chord that's going to follow on the next beat. But notice that by reducing these all to blocks, at least it's easier for us to figure out what's going on harmonically. That's all for today.